Do more is a call to action for all Australians to be allies, making the commitment to become more informed, more educated, and more engaged in creating positive change to challenge racism. This conversation series seeks to make change through storytelling. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community, and what we learn through storytelling culture of the longest continuous civilization on the planet. We pay our respect to elders, past and present.
Hi, my name's Shelley Ware, and today for the DoMore campaign, we'll be speaking to Linda Marigliano. You may recognise her from Series 1, so we thought we'd catch up with her and see what she learned and prepare to now for Australia. How are you, Linda?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. So good to have you here. Series 1 was huge, and you got to speak to some amazing people. Can we start with what you learned from the people that you spoke to?
One of the great things about the Do More project, and particularly everything that's been going on this year, is that you realise what a process of learning and unlearning we all have to do. Like, I remember when I spoke to Bruce Jeter, and he said this thing towards the end of the chat. I think step one is acknowledging the thought that you have, whether it's a comment that you're about to make or some slur that you didn't realize was on before. Step one is acknowledging that and stopping yourself from saying that out loud or from really, buying into that mentality. Step two is not having that thought altogether. Another really lovely nugget that I feel like I got so many great little bits of gold from everyone, but when I was talking to Sky Thomas, so Sky Soju Gang, and she was talking a lot about this idea of colorism and about how, and if we apply it to something like diversity in media, it's this idea of striving for diversity in media that extends beyond an acceptable looking diverse person. So it's not just, and she was using the example of Indigenous people that are white passing or that are, more acceptable looking or a little bit more lighter skinned. And speaking to someone like Nana Owusu as well, where she was talking about how hard it was being an incredibly dark shade of skin. And it's again something that you need to be switched onto and then be able to apply that framework into your everyday life, which I have found is being a wonderful way of thinking about things and feeling like you can actually make a difference, because you can change. It's quite easy to change that behavior and those thoughts within yourself, just as long as you're aware and as long as you're willing to put the work in. At the risk of being the party pooper in a conversation, I've had to go like, hey Dad, why did you say that? Like, why did you think that about that person that you saw on TV or that served you at this certain place? And it's ends up being, and you have to do it in a really, tactful, compassionate, yet direct way. And that's an exciting thing to do as well, because being able to have those proactive conversations with people, even though they don't feel like the easiest thing to do, the payoff is so satisfying because you both end up getting something out of it.
What are the barriers for people of colour to be a part of media? What do you think they are?
I think the barriers are probably hardest to overcome because they're almost invisible. Like, a lot of it's so subtle and so understated, and that's why it's even harder to call it out, because it's almost like, well, oh, that doesn't exist. What do you mean? Like, that's we have brown people on TV. We have people doing these things. And if they're not, it's because they don't want to be. And it's like, well, I'm not sure why you would think that. But I think the barrier for diversity in media is simply that there's not enough. That in a lot of these cases, in general, majority rules. And if you don't have someone at the very top tier of the organisation or the production company, essentially the person that's making the decisions, pushing forward and thinking outside the box that already exists and questioning the next person that's going to step into the role as news anchor, the next person that's going to step into the role as the family that's cast in the TV show of typical Australia or suburban Australia, if that person isn't on the front foot about changing the landscape and diversifying that landscape, then that's where the barriers are. And it's the simple slogan of if you see it, you can be it. And when you're not seeing it, perhaps you're not thinking about, well, that could be me.
The holes are huge, and in my experience in media, I have had people say things to me that people aren't ready to see Aboriginal people on television, on their television screens all the time, or Aboriginal people aren't there because they haven't tried hard enough. And you know, after 20 years in the media industry, I can tell you I've tried hard enough. I've been working pretty hard.
It's even, you know, I come from an immigrant family. You know, my dad's whole family came here from Italy. My mum came here from Malaysia. And even within them, and as we were saying before, there is this instilled, well, maybe those sorts of people aren't on TV because they don't want to be. And they'll say stuff like that to me, who works on TV. And I'm like, well, you're speaking to someone that how am I different from this other girl over here or this other young man over here? There are young people that are hungry for those roles, but perhaps feel that they don't have the potential or the leg up to do those. Of course they want them. Of course they want to host that lifestyle show or host this or host that or be able to talk on this range of issues.
What is something that you think that is really small that people could do every day in their lives?
Something that we touched on a little bit, which is that everybody grows up within their own context and their bubble of values and understanding. And if you are learning or unlearning a value of understanding or wanting to champion diversity and really help an Australian society flourish in that way, then all you need to do is apply that framework the same way that you would your general value system to your everyday life. So it's the way that you're treating people. It doesn't have to be huge things. You don't have to sit and beat yourself up that you haven't donated to an organisation that aligns with your values every week. Sure, you should do that. That's great. But on an everyday level, you can really just apply that paradigm of understanding and of equality to your interactions with your friends, to your interactions with the person that's serving you, to how you serve people at your work. And if you are lucky enough to be in a position where you're hiring people or casting people in a role, or where you can actually influence what Australia sees back as a reflection of itself, then make that part of your job and like take pride in that. There's things that we can do every day, no matter what level you're on. So it can just be your interactions with people every day. And it can also be changing, making bigger changes within your occupation or within the way that society sees itself. Really calling it out, really questioning behavior, whether it's questioning your behavior or a family member's or a friend's, and trying to change that around, and calling things out on behalf of not just you experiencing it. Yeah. So it's not just about me experiencing a really personal attack of racism or someone making an assumption or calling me something that feels a little bit tone deaf. It's about seeing it in the media or seeing it happen to someone in your context and calling it out there. Because I think that allyship is the most important thing. It's amazing to see Indigenous Australians standing up for Indigenous Australians' rights. But I love seeing white Australians calling it out too. If we can do that, and if we can change policies, if we can make people aware of the actual facts in terms of statistics and what media also looks like, that's where real change will happen. I think for me, the personal moments of racism in my life have been more so those moments when you're growing up and you're not quite sure, and the kids around you are also not quite sure. So it's growing up, and I remember going to dancing class, and some of the girls that were, you know, the ones that you want to be, they were surfer girls, they were all blonde. And I remember walking in one day and they started chanting WOG. You know, it wasn't really a moment, you know, it was the 90s. It wasn't really, didn't really feel like there was a moment where another 13-year-old girl would come up to me and go, I'm the ally. Don't say that, you know. But I those are the moments that for me, you know, thankfully I haven't been faced with really aggressive racism the way that a lot of other people have. But moments like that, I remember feeling really that us versus them mentality and that feeling of not belonging. And so for me, I guess it's about me being an ally, and it's about me knowing that it stops with me. It might have happened when I was at school. I might hear comments that even my parents make or family members make, but it stops with me. My kids won't hear that from me. The kind of generations that come after me hopefully won't have to encounter that as a normal sort of thing. Yeah, I think that for me is the biggest form of ally, and that's coming from within me. Boys calling me exotic once, but they were calling it to me in a cool way, like, where's that different chick? She's that different exotic chick. Or I remember when I was in year 3, a group of boys started calling me Buddha, the Buddha in the class, because my mum's Chinese. But with that WOG one, I remember feeling really sheepish and really uncomfortable. And I remember that they were doing it in particular as well because this sounds so silly now, I was wearing an Adidas jacket too. And they were like, here comes the WOG, here comes the homie, get away from her, she's not one of us. It was this like chanting kind of thing. And I remember feeling really self-conscious and really sheepish and taking the jacket off and like stuffing it in my bag and, you know, walking in. And that's what happens most of the time, right? That's what you would do. It's, I mean, what are you meant to say to that when you're 13 years old?
There are so many conversations going on about racism and about people doing more. What's a voice that you would like people to listen to? An organisation, someone on Twitter? Who would you recommend?
I would love to shout out to an organisation that a couple of my best friends who are my biggest advocates for change, I think, have put me onto. They've introduced me to so many great organisations this year, but one of the ones that I really love is one that was started in Gunnedah in New South Wales by a woman. Her name is Auntie Hazel Collins, and she's a grandmother. And the actual company is called Grandmothers Against Removals, a company where Hazel calls out the mispractice of child welfare officers and the systemic removal of Aboriginal children. So it happens, it's still happening. It happened to her grandchildren. And so she not only wanted to fight about it in terms of her personal context, but she wanted to raise awareness to when this happens on a bigger scale within Australia. They're not on social media, so you're not going to find them on Instagram, but if you just Google for them, you can find their website, and it's really easy just to donate to them.
The removal of Aboriginal children is definitely still happening at a higher rate than it should. And just being a teacher and working within this space, people quickly want to call DHS on families. And I have to continuously remind them that these things are happening in non-Aboriginal homes every day and nobody's looking. Nobody's actually putting the magnifying glass on there and saying, oh, they should be reported to DHS as well. It can be like the simple things that people have got, but they're always quick to want to call DHS, which is an issue, instead of working with their family, working with them with trauma and working with what's going on. And Yeah, it can be the smallest, tiniest thing that you normally wouldn't bother anyone, but they're very quick to want to contact services.
Yeah.
What does future Australia look like without racism to you?
It looks like when you walk into a workplace or when you look at what people are making policy changes in politics, it looks like when you turn on the TV that there is an accurate representation of the people that you see when you walk down the street. And for me, that would be so exciting. If I could think about the range of diverse friends, incredible different voices, backgrounds, stories that even I just encounter by the people that I see in my world, I would love to see that reflected in the media. I would love to see that by turning on primetime television. I would love to see those people cast in roles, whether it be in fiction or whether it be in the newsroom. I would love to see that when I'm driving down the highway and looking at billboards and seeing the face of Australia being beamed back to me. And I would love to see that in terms of policymakers that are elected within states, within governments, Australia-wide. That for me would feel real and feel like it's all worth it.
Thank you, Linda Marigliano, for being here with the DoMore project. You've been absolutely wonderful sharing your insights. Series 1 was fantastic. If you missed Series 1, go back and listen to all of the great interviews. And thank you for recapping and sharing your experiences through your life with racism and how Australia can do more.
Thanks, Shelley.
Find ways you can do more at domoreproject.com.au.